By the time I pulled into my parents' driveway, every window of the house was already glowing. Laughter leaked out through the glass like steam, muffled clinks of silverware riding underneath it. I checked the time on my phone. 20 minutes passed when Mom had told me to come. Late, sure, but not the kind of late that usually mattered to anyone but her. I told myself they'd just be finishing up the small talk, maybe passing around the first bowl of mashed potatoes. There would be a chair waiting, a plate with my name in their voices, if not in writing. That's what I told myself as I grabbed the pie from the passenger seat and walked up the front steps like any other guest. The door was unlocked, as it always was on nights like this. I didn't knock. I never had to before. Warmth hit me first. Then the smell. Roast chicken, butter, something sweet baking, and the faint floral detergent my mother used on every tablecloth she cared about. I slipped off my shoes in the entryway, balancing the pie, and followed the sound of conversation toward the dining room. For a moment, standing in the hallway, it almost felt normal. I could pretend I was simply late to a family that had been missing me, that someone would turn, see me, and light up. Then I stepped into the doorway and saw the table. Every seat was filled. Plates were already half empty, gravy streaked, vegetables pushed to the side, glasses sweated rings onto the white cloth, and the serving dishes in the center looked picked over, like a painting caught just after the moment of abundance. My brother's kids were arguing quietly over a roll. My sister was scrolling on her phone with one hand and twirling her fork in the other. My father was halfway through a story, knife suspended above his plate. The only thing that wasn't there was me, or any sign that I'd ever been expected. There was no chair pulled out, no empty space between settings, no plate waiting upside down with a folded napkin like a placeholder. It was a complete picture, framed and finished, and I didn't fit. I stood there, the pie suddenly heavy in my hands, and watched as the realization slid down my spine. This wasn't, "We haven't started yet." This was, "We already began without you." "Hey," my father said finally, noticing me over my mother's shoulder. His voice was too loud, the way people get when they're trying to pretend nothing is wrong. "You made it." A few heads turned. My niece gave a half-hearted wave before returning to her potatoes. My brother lifted his chin in a nod. My sister didn't look up. The conversation stuttered, then resumed around me, adjusting just enough to acknowledge that I was physically present, but not important enough to rearrange anything for. I hovered near the doorway, coat still on, pie clutched against my chest like a shield no one had asked me to bring. My mother finally stood, dabbing the corners of her mouth with her napkin, as if she were on a stage and needed to hit her marks. She walked toward me, heel soft against the hardwood, her smile well-practiced and distant. Up close, I could see a smear of lipstick on her front tooth and a tiny flour smudge on her wrist. Details I shouldn't have noticed in a moment like that, but sometimes your brain grabs onto anything to avoid the bigger thing. "You're late," she murmured, not unkindly, but not kindly either. Her eyes flicked down to the pie. "You didn't have to bring anything." "I said I'd be around 7, I replied. "It's 7:20. "Well," she said, glancing back at the table, "we couldn't wait forever. Everyone was starving." Her hand brushed my elbow, like she might lead me somewhere, and for a breath I thought she'd pull out a chair, call for an extra plate, make space. Instead, she leaned in close, her perfume wrapping around me, and dropped her voice to a whisper meant only for my ears. "We didn't save you a plate," she said. The words were light on her tongue, almost playful, but they landed with the weight of stone. Not, "We ran out of room," not, "We'll set you up in a second," just a simple statement of fact. There was nothing here for me. At the table, my brother cleared his throat. Someone laughed, a thin, nervous sound that died quickly. My father kept his eyes on his meal with a sudden fierce concentration, sawing at his chicken like it had done something wrong. No one met my gaze. Heat crawled up my neck, pooling in my cheeks. For a second, my body reacted the way it always had, shoulders wanting to round inward, voice shrinking back down my throat, tongue reaching automatically for the old script. "I'm fine. I already ate. Don't worry about it." A lifetime of swallowing things whole rose up in me, bitter and familiar. But my hands didn't move. I didn't set the pie down and slip toward the kitchen like an afterthought. I didn't smile and make a joke about being on a diet or not needing dinner. I stood there, rooted, feeling the sting of humiliation burn clean instead of letting it scab over in silence. Around me, the room kept pretending to breathe normally, but the air had changed. My mother started to pull away, already turning back to her seat, conversation waiting to close over the gap where I stood. And for the first time, I felt something inside me shift, not breaking, just aligning with a truth I'd been dodging for years. The response rose in my chest, steady and clear, louder than my fear of making a scene. For once, I didn't swallow it. I answered. That sentence from my mother didn't come out of nowhere. It landed on top of a lifetime of smaller moments, a structure that had been built so slowly I almost convinced myself it wasn't there. When I think about it honestly, most of my childhood memories revolve around the table too, but always from the edge of it, never the center. When we were kids, dinner was supposed to be the one time of day everyone came together. Mom would put on music, something soft and inoffensive, and announce what she'd made like a hostess unveiling a buffet. My older sister, Hannah, always sat to Dad's right, my younger brother, Ben, to his left. Those were just their spots, non-negotiable, engraved into the wood by years of repetition. My chair floated at the far end, nearest the kitchen door, easy to vacate when someone needed more water, ketchup, salt, anything. Mom served Dad first, then Hannah, then Ben. By the time the serving dish reached me, it was a scrape of sauce, the smallest piece of chicken, the heel of the bread. If I hesitated, Mom would give that bright, brittle smile and say, "You can always make a sandwich if you're still hungry," as if that were a treat. Hannah, meanwhile, could ask for seconds before I had even taken my first bite, and no one blinked. I remember one night when I was 8, Mom made lasagna, the kind she only cooked for special occasions. The cheese stretched in those long, magazine-worthy strings when she sliced into it, steam curling up like the commercials. Hannah had just won some minor gymnastics competition, 3rd place out of 5, but you'd have thought she'd taken Olympic gold from the way everyone was talking. "To our little star," Dad said, raising his glass of iced tea. Mom beamed. "You worked so hard, sweetheart. You deserve this." Hannah's slice was enormous, taken from the center where all the layers were thickest. Ben's wasn't much smaller. By the time the pan reached me, there was a corner piece and a few clinging bits of noodle. Mom scraped them onto my plate, shrugged, and said, "Next time, don't dawdle washing your hands." "I was setting the table," I said, my voice small even to my own ears. "Yes, and you did a great job," she replied, already looking away. "Now eat before it gets cold." I ate the crispy edge of lasagna and tried not to notice Hannah leaving half of hers untouched. When I asked if I could have it, Mom shook her head. She might want it later. Hannah didn't. It went into the trash with a dull splat after dessert. Birthdays were their own kind of hierarchy. Hannah's parties were productions, balloons, themes, banners, an entire dining room transformed into whatever obsession she currently had. Princesses one year, then mermaids, then some pop star whose songs echoed down the hall for weeks. Her cakes were tall, layered, frosted professionally, candles crowding the top. Family and neighbors packed the room, cameras flashed, and Mom would carefully slice generous pieces, pressing them into paper plates decorated to match. My birthdays were smaller. Cozy, Mom called them. "You're my easy one," she'd say, as if that were an unqualified compliment. One year, I remember a grocery store cake in a flimsy plastic box, my name misspelled in blue icing. No decorations, just a single candle because it's symbolic, Dad joked. I shared the table with a stack of laundry Mom was folding between bites. That was the same year I'd won first place in the school science fair. I'd stayed up late for weeks, measuring plant growth under different light bulbs, charting everything in neat, careful handwriting. The ribbon felt heavy and important when my teacher pinned it to my shirt. I came home practically vibrating. "Mom, Dad, look!" I held out the certificate like it was a passport to a different life. Mom glanced at it while stirring sauce. "Oh, that's nice, honey. Put it on the fridge." Dad, reading the mail at the table, didn't even look up. "Good job," he muttered absently. "School stuff is your thing." Hannah wandered in 10 minutes later, announced she'd been asked to try out for the advanced gymnastics group, and suddenly dinner turned into another planning session. Schedules, meet fees, outfits. My ribbon curled slowly at the corner of the fridge until the magnet fell off a month later and it disappeared into the junk drawer. Even photos told the same story. There's a picture from one Thanksgiving that makes me laugh now for all the wrong reasons. Everyone is gathered around the table, plates full, heads tilted toward Hannah as she raises a glass of sparkling cider for a toast. Dad is mid-laugh. Mom's hand is resting proudly on Hannah's chair, then is leaning in. There's a gap at the far end of the table where a chair should be, just an empty slice of wood peeking through. I know where I was in that moment, standing by the kitchen sink, rinsing the last serving spoon because Mom had asked me to just quickly take care of the dishes before dessert. She called out, "Smile," as she snapped the photo, and I smiled at the backsplash, not realizing I wasn't in the frame at all. Another year, Christmas Eve, the dining room overflowed with relatives. Extra leaves had been added to the table, chairs borrowed from the patio and mismatched but bustling with bodies. When I came in carrying a basket of rolls, every seat was taken. My aunt patted the back of her son's chair. "We squeezed him in," she said cheerfully. "Where should I sit?" I asked, shifting the basket from hand to hand. Mom waved vaguely toward the living room. "You can eat on the couch, sweetheart. You're young. You won't mind." So I balanced a plate on my knees, tried not to drop gravy on the carpet, and laughed along with jokes told in the next room, half heard, always a beat behind. When I drifted closer, someone would say, "Grab more napkins, will you?" Or, "Can you refill the water?" It was easier to stay moving than to admit there was nowhere for me to land. Dad never said much. That was his specialty, silence, the kind that could pass for neutrality if you didn't look too closely. If I ever pointed things out later, saying it felt unfair that Hannah got new cleats again while my shoes had holes, or that Ben's mediocre report card earned a pizza night while my straight A's had a nod, Dad would sigh. "You know your mother. She gets excited. Don't start drama. Be the bigger person." Be the bigger person. Make do. Don't mind. These were the phrases ladled onto my plate over and over until I learned to swallow them without chewing. It wasn't just the food or the seats or the pictures. It was the feeling that my role in that house was to facilitate everyone else's comfort and then be grateful for whatever scraps of attention fell in my direction. I used to tell myself it was accidental, that big families were messy, that someone was always going to get the short end of something, and it just happened to be me most of the time. But looking back, the pattern is so sharp it almost cuts. Hannah was the star, announced and applauded, then was the baby, indulged and excused. Dad was the observer, distant and unchallenged. And me? I floated at the edges, serving, clearing, adjusting, fitting myself into the leftover spaces no one else wanted. I learned early that in our house, some people were guests of honor, and some of us were just help. Leaving home didn't feel like rebellion at first. It felt like coming up for air. College was 3 hours away, just far enough that my parents couldn't drop in unannounced, close enough that they could still remind me it wasn't really that far. I crammed my life into 2 suitcases and a box of mismatched mugs, rode in the back of Dad's SUV while he and Mom bickered over directions, and watched our town shrink in the rearview mirror like a set I'd finally been allowed to walk off. Campus was noisy, crowded, anonymous in the best way. In the dining hall, no one cared where you sat as long as you had a tray. For the first time, I could pick a table, set my plate down, and know that spot belonged to me until I chose to move. It was such a small thing, but I remember standing there that first week, tray in hand, paralyzed by the freedom of it. I didn't have to hover and wait for permission. I could just sit. Distance gave me oxygen, but it didn't cut the cord. My phone buzzed with Mom's group messages obsessing over Hannah's meets, Ben's grades, Dad's minor health complaints. When I called, the conversations were short and lopsided. "How's school?" Mom would ask. "Good, busy. Your sister landed a new routine," she'd interrupt. "We're driving all over for her. I swear, that girl never rests." I took on extra shifts at the campus cafe, then a library job, then freelance tutoring. Between classes and work, I barely slept, convinced that if I excelled enough, if I became undeniable on paper, my family would finally have no choice but to see me. When the summer came and my roommates scattered home, I stayed, stacking more hours, sending bits of money back when Mom hinted about being a little tight this month. "I know you don't have much," she'd say, voice sigh soft, "but anything helps. Things are just so expensive with Hannah's competitions and Ben talking about college." I wired $50, then $100, then more when I picked up extra tutoring clients. No one asked how my rent looked, how my pantry shelves were holding up. They thanked me in the same tone they used when I'd passed the salt as a kid, absently, automatically. Coming home for breaks was its own lesson. The first Thanksgiving I returned, I walked into my old bedroom and stopped dead. The posters were gone, the shelves cleared. Hannah's spare leotards hung in the closet, my desk was covered in Ben's textbooks, and a folded treadmill sat where my bed used to be. "Oh, we converted it into a workout room," Mom said breezily when I asked. "You're hardly here anymore. There's a pull-out in the office you can use." The pullout was lumpy, squeezed between filing cabinets that hummed at night, spitting out drafts of Dad's reports. I lay there listening to the murmur of voices from the kitchen, feeling like a guest in a house where I'd grown up. In the morning, Mom handed me a list of errands before I could even pour coffee. "Since you're around, could you run to the store and pick up Hannah's dress from alterations and take Ben to his friend's house? It's just easier when you help." They never asked what my finals were like or how my job was going. If I tried to bring it up, someone needed a ride, or Mom remembered she'd burned the rolls, or Dad changed the subject to interest rates. I left each visit more tired than when I arrived, like I'd been on a shift instead of a break. The first real contrast came sophomore year when I met Lena. She was in my statistics class, loud in the way I wasn't, all big gestures and bigger opinions. We became study partners, then friends, then the kind of almost sisters who could split fries without asking. One weekend, when the dorm heat went out and my fingers went numb over my laptop, she insisted I come home with her. "Your mom will kill me if I don't bring you," she said. "She loves feeding strays." I expected chaos, maybe polite tolerance at best. Instead, the minute we stepped through her front door, her mother enveloped me in a hug that smelled like cinnamon and laundry soap. "You must be the famous study partner," she said. "Take off your shoes. We've got lasagna." At their table, there was a chair waiting, already pulled out. A plate, a glass, a folded napkin. When the pan came around, Lena's mom served me first, heaping my plate like I'd been arriving starved for weeks. "Eat," she urged. "You're too thin. School will do that to you." They asked me questions and then actually waited for the answers about my classes, my job, the project I was proud of. When I fumbled and tried to turn the attention back to them, Lena's dad just laughed. "Let us brag on you a little," he said. "You're here, you're family." After dinner, I reached for a stack of plates by reflex, and Lena's mom swatted my hand away gently. "Guests sit. You can help next time when you're not running on fumes." It was such a jarring kindness that my throat closed up. I swallowed hard and pretended it was just the cheese catching, but I carried that moment back to campus like a secret. For the first time, I understood that what I'd grown up with wasn't just how families are. There were households where nobody had to earn their place, where a plate and a chair were givens, not prizes. Still, every time a holiday approached, my stomach nodded the same way. Mom would call or text, sometimes last minute, sometimes with weeks of guilt woven in. "It would mean a lot if you came," she'd say. "We never see you anymore. Don't you care about your family?" So I'd look at my calendar, my deadlines, the invitations from friends or from Lena's family, and I'd push them aside. I'd buy a bus ticket or gas up my car, pack a bag, and head back to the house where my room was a treadmill and my name was an afterthought. Each trip I told myself a familiar story. Maybe this time they'll have a bed made. Maybe this time they'll ask about my life. Maybe this time there will be a place set at the table with my name on it, even if only in their voices. I kept rushing from the life I was building back to those dinners, hoping, against all the evidence, that this time would be different. The invitation for this particular dinner didn't arrive as an invitation at all. It was a text from my mother on a Wednesday afternoon, squeezed between a dentist reminder and a forwarded article about young people and burnout. "Dinner here Sunday. Everyone's coming. You can come if you're not busy." No time, no occasion, no question mark, just a statement with an optional footnote like I was an afterthought add-on to plans that had already solidified without me. A second later, another message followed. "Just don't be late this time." I stared at the screen, thumb hovering. In the family group chat, there were already photos. Hannah and Mom at the grocery store picking out flowers, Ben helping Dad string lights on the back porch, a screenshot of a Pinterest perfect tablescape Hannah had sent days ago. The messages were filled with "can't wait" and "what should I bring?" threaded above Mom's text to me like a conversation I'd walked in too late. My first instinct was to say I couldn't make it. I had a prior plan. Lena's parents had invited me for a low-key Sunday pot roast, and I'd told them yes weeks ago. The idea of sitting at their table, where my place was guaranteed, felt like a soft landing after a long week. "You don't have to go," Lena said when I showed her the messages. We were sitting on my couch, laptops open, pretending to work. "You know how it ends. You come back drained and second-guessing yourself." "I know," I said, rubbing my thumb over the cracked edge of my phone case. "I know, but if I don't go, it'll be a whole thing. You never come around anymore. You don't care about family." She grimaced. "It's wild how they make you feel guilty for not showing up to be ignored." I laughed, but it lodged somewhere uncomfortable. The guilt script was already unspooling in my head, pre-recorded in my mother's voice. I typed, "I've already got plans, maybe next time," then deleted it. Typed, "What time?" instead. 6:30, Mom replied almost immediately, as if she'd been waiting. "We'll start without you if you're late." No smiley face, no looking forward to it. Another red flag, waving, but I folded it neatly and tucked it away. Over the next few days, my phone lit up with more group chat activity. Hannah posting a selfie in a new dress, Ben joking about stretchy pants for Mom's cooking, Dad sending a blurry photo of the turkey in its brine. No one asked if I'd be bringing anything or even acknowledged that I'd said I was coming. When I added a simple "I'll be there" to the thread, it sank without response, lost between a debate about sides and a picture of Hannah's centerpiece. Saturday night, I sat at my kitchen table with my planner open, looking at the small square where I'd written Lena's 6 p.m. I crossed it out with a slow line and wrote home above it instead. It felt like erasing something bigger than just dinner. "You're really going," Lena said on Sunday afternoon as I wrapped the pie I'd baked, more out of habit than hope. "Yeah," I said. "Maybe it'll be okay this time. It's been a while. Maybe they'll, I don't know, try." She watched me for a long moment. "Or maybe you'll finally stop pretending it doesn't hurt." Her words followed me into the car, sat in the passenger seat next to the pie. On the drive over, I rehearsed neutral topics, safe small talk, ways to steer conversations away from guilt and back toward common ground. Part of me still believed, stubbornly, that if I just showed up enough, adjusted enough, they'd meet me halfway. But under that thin hope was something harder, a readiness I hadn't had before. I was going, yes, I was giving them yet another chance to make a place for me. At the same time, I was already braced for the familiar sting of subtle slights, the sideways comments, the way my presence would register more as obligation than as welcome. This dinner, in my mind, was a test and a last offering all at once, a chance to reconnect, to see if anything had shifted or if the roles were still carved in stone. I walked up their front steps carrying dessert and a sliver of hope, but also the quiet awareness that I couldn't keep erasing my own life to chase a seat at a table where I'd never really been expected. By the time I turned onto their street, the sky had already gone that deep blue that makes every lit window look like a postcard. I balanced the still warm pie on one hand and hit the doorbell with the other, then remembered they'd never locked it on nights like this. I twisted the handle and stepped inside to a wave of heat, spice, and the faint scent of the cleaner Mom only used when company was coming. The hallway cable was dressed up with a seasonal runner and a bowl of perfectly arranged pine cones. Family photos lined the wall. Hannah in a sequin dress, then in a cap and gown, Mom and Dad on some recent vacation. I scanned them automatically, knowing I'd find myself less and less the further down I looked. Voices floated from the dining room, overlapping and animated. As I rounded the corner, the scene could have been ripped from one of Mom's Pinterest boards. The table was set with her good china, candles flickering in the center, cloth napkins folded into intricate shapes. Everyone was mid-meal, plates already smeared with gravy, wine glasses half empty. Hannah was in the middle of a story, her hands painting pictures in the air, while Ben laughed loud enough to rattle the silverware. No one stood when I appeared in the doorway. Heads turned just enough to register that a new object had entered the frame, then drifted back to their places. "Oh," Mom said, catching sight of me over her shoulder, "you made it." The words were technically welcome, but they landed like a comment on the weather. She didn't come over, didn't open her arms. Her smile flickered on and off, polite and distant, before she turned back to adjust a serving dish. "I brought pie," I said, because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. "Just put it in the kitchen. We've already started dessert plans, but I'm sure someone will eat it." I carried it to the counter and slid it into an empty corner next to trays that clearly been arranged hours before. When I came back, I finally let myself really look at the table. Every chair was occupied. Each place had a plate, cutlery, a glass, a napkin. There was no empty setting waiting, no space left between chairs like a held breath. Even the kids had booster cushions and little name cards in loopy handwriting. Around the edges of the table, chairs had been squeezed in, backs nearly touching the wall, but the geometry was complete. "Look who decided to show," Ben called, grinning. "Thought you forgot where we lived." A couple of chuckles rose and fell. "Traffic," I said, though it wasn't entirely true, and I had to finish something for work. Hannah rolled her eyes lightly, spearing another piece of potato. "Always working," she murmured. "Some of us made it on time." I scanned again, as if a chair might materialize if I just wanted it enough. All I saw was my reflection warped in the shine of the silverware. My coat felt suddenly too hot, the room too small. Dad glanced up at me briefly, then back down to his plate. "Grab yourself something," he said, gesturing vaguely toward the kitchen as if I'd wandered in from next door and were freeloading. I stayed where I was, fingers curling into my palms. That familiar feeling rose, the one that said, "Move, adjust, make this easier for everyone but yourself." Mom finally pushed back her chair and stood, napkin still in her hand. She walked over, not quite close enough to touch. From this distance, I could see the little crease between her brows, the one that appeared whenever something threatened the picture she was trying to maintain. "You really shouldn't cut it so close," she said softly, though not so soft that others could hear.
We can't keep everyone waiting." "I'm here," I answered. "It's only 20 minutes." She sighed, that long-suffering sound I knew too well, and leaned in, her lips brushing the air near my ear. "We didn't save you a plate," she whispered. For a breath, the words hung there, unreal. Then they sank in, as heavy and casual as dropping a stone in water. The room hit a strange suspended silence. Forks paused mid-air, conversations clipped off mid-sentence. Then someone, maybe Hannah, let out a quick, strained laugh. "Well, you know her, always fashionably late." The noise picked back up, thinner now, stretched over the gap like plastic wrap. I stood at the edge of the table, the only person without a place, feeling every eye that refused to meet mine. For years I would have smiled, said I'd already eaten, and pretended it didn't hurt. But this time, something in me snapped into place, not broken, aligned. Standing there without a plate, it wasn't just this dinner pressing in on me. It was every dinner that had come before it, layered one on top of another until the weight of them all settled in my chest. The room blurred at the edges, candlelight bleeding into soft halos, and for a moment I wasn't 32 in a nice shirt holding my breath. I was 8 again, 12, 17, always hovering in doorways, always half in and half out. I remembered the Thanksgiving when Mom decided there wasn't enough room at the main table. She said it so cheerfully, as if banishing me to the kitchen was a fun adventure. "You can have a kid's table," she chirped, dragging a card table against the counter. Except all the actual kids, my cousins, my brother, my sister, had spots at the big table beside the adults. The only one sitting at the wobbling plastic rectangle, knees knocking the underside, was me.
"Someone has to guard the pies," Dad had joked when he saw my face, clapping me on the shoulder before taking his seat in the dining room. Laughter rolled down the hallway, warm and full, while I tried to balance my plate on the unstable surface, listening to stories I wasn't close enough to really hear. When I edged my chair backward, inching toward the doorway so I could at least see them, Mom called from the dining room, "Don't crowd, honey, there's no space." Another Christmas, we'd had neighbors over, and Mom went all out. Roast, 3 sides, 2 desserts. She'd counted chairs, counted napkins, counted glasses, her lips moving silently as she worked. I remember standing in the doorway, watching her line up the silverware like soldiers, feeling weirdly proud of how perfect everything looked. When it was finally time to sit, people streamed into the room, slotting into their designated places. I hung back, waiting for my cue, for someone to point me toward my spot. It never came. Every chair was taken, every plate already claimed. "Where should I started. Mom glanced up, eyes skimming over me like I was something on the wall. "Oh, I must have miscounted," she said lightly. "Just grab a stool from the kitchen and eat at the counter. You don't mind, do you?" I did mind. I minded so much my hand shook as I pulled the cold metal stool over, the scrape echoing in the tiled room. But I smiled, because that's what you do when everyone else looks so pleased with themselves. That night, the neighbor's teenage daughter took photos for her social media. In every shot, my family is gathered around the glowing table, faces turned toward the camera, plates steaming. In the background, you can see the faint outline of me at the counter, blurred and half turned away, like I was never really part of the scene to begin with. It wasn't just seating, it was how celebrations were rationed out. When Hannah passed her driving test on the 3rd try, Mom threw an impromptu barbecue. "We have to mark the occasion," she'd said, inviting neighbors over, stringing lights in the backyard, buying a cake with a car piped in icing. When Ben scored his first goal in a middle school soccer game, Dad ordered pizzas and declared it Ben's night. When I got my first real job out of college, after months of interviews and rejections and ramen dinners, I called home expecting hoping for a flicker of that same enthusiasm. They picked me," I said, breathless. "Full-time, benefits. It's a good start." "That's nice, honey. Listen, Hannah's thinking of changing her major. She's so stressed." "Good for you," Dad added vaguely from somewhere in the background. "That's what you went to school for, right?" There was no dinner, no toast, no "we're proud of you," just a quiet "you'll do fine," before the conversation shifted back to their familiar orbit. I ended up buying myself takeout that night and eating it alone in my tiny apartment, toasting my own future with flat soda and the hollow clink of chopsticks on plastic. My graduation had been the same. I walked across a stage in a borrowed gown, my name echoing across an auditorium, and scanned the crowd for their faces. They were there, technically, but their expressions were tired, distracted. Afterwards, in the crowded lawn, Mom fussed with Hannah's hair for photos while Dad checked his watch, muttering about traffic. "Can we stop for dinner?" I asked as we headed toward the parking lot, diploma folder clutched so tightly my knuckles ached. "We grabbed sandwiches on the way. We're still full. Besides, your brother has practice." They handed me a card with $20 in it and a note that read, "Don't spend it all at once," like it was a joke we were all in on. There was that one particularly sharp memory from a 4th of July when I was a teenager. Mom had counted out hot dogs, 3 per person, she'd said, tapping the package, then frowned. "We're one short," she mused. "Oh well, someone will just have to share." Fireworks cracked in the distance as everyone lined up at the grill, laughing and grabbing buns. By the time I reached the front, the platter was empty, grease cooling where the last one had been. Mom looked over, saw my face, and shrugged. "You can make a peanut butter sandwich. You like those." "I thought you said 3 each," I said, heat prickling behind my eyes. "Well, I didn't know Ben would invite Kyle," she replied, already turning away. "Don't start. You're not starving." When I opened my mouth to protest, to point out that we were literally at a grocery store's walking distance and could have easily bought more, Dad cut in. "Don't be ungrateful," his tone low and warning. "Your mother worked hard. Don't ruin the evening over a hot dog." Every time I tried to name the pattern, to say out loud that it felt like I didn't count the same way, the response was the same. I was too sensitive, making things up, dramatic. "You always twist things to make yourself the victim," Mom would say, shaking her head. "We do our best for all of you." "Your sister just needs more from us," Dad would add. "You're the independent one. You'll be fine." Independent had become code for invisible. Fine had become shorthand for we don't have to worry about you. And underneath every minimization was the same unspoken message. You don't belong here the way they do. You're extra, optional. So, as I stood beside that overflowing table, hearing my mother say, "We didn't save you a plate," it didn't feel like a slip. It felt like the thesis of my entire upbringing, finally spoken plainly. All those nights in the kitchen, all the missed celebrations, all the times there wasn't enough once everyone they cared about had been fed, none of it had been an oversight. The realization settled in my bones with an awful, clarifying calm. They had never forgotten me. They'd simply chosen not to make room. I set the pie down on the nearest flat surface, fingers lingering on the foil as if I could anchor myself to it. For a second, the old reflex tugged at me. Retreat to the kitchen, busy my hands, disappear into usefulness. If I moved fast enough, maybe I could convince myself this was just an awkward moment, not a verdict. Instead, I straightened and let myself really see the room. The table looked almost obscene in its completeness. Plates ringed with sauce, serving bowls still half full, bread basket tipped on its side from too many reaching hands, glasses clustered together like a small city of crystal.
There was nowhere to add even a side plate without asking someone to shift, to scoot, to acknowledge that space doesn't just appear, it had to be made. Hannah kept her eyes on her food with exaggerated focus, cutting a tiny piece of meat into meticulous squares she never brought to her mouth. For someone so naturally loud, her silence was deafening. Ben's gaze flicked up to mine for a heartbeat, then skittered away, landing on his phone like it had suddenly become urgent. At the far end, Aunt Carl, the one relative who occasionally texted me on my birthday of her own accord, shifted in her chair, mouth tightening. She looked like she might say something, then thought better of it and reached for the salt instead. Dad chewed. That was all. Knife and fork moving in neat, mechanical motions, eyes fixed on his plate as if the pattern in the porcelain was the most fascinating thing he'd ever seen. Every so often, his jaw flexed a little harder, the only sign that he'd heard anything at all. It was his specialty, this studied non-reaction that let him live in the space between complicity and innocence, as if silence was a neutral choice.
The realization hit me then with the same cold clarity as the one before. This wasn't just my mother's problem. It never had been. She might have spoken the line, but everyone at that table had rehearsed their role in this scene for years. The quick joke to smooth things over, the averted eyes, the concentrated chewing, the tiny, uncomfortable fidget that never quite turned into action. If it had just been her, maybe I could have written it off as one person's cruelty. But the way they all moved around it, cushioning, excusing, pretending, it turned the moment into a group project. I wasn't just up against a thoughtless comment, I was standing in front of an entire system that relied on me doing what I'd always done, shrinking, smiling, stepping aside. My heart was pounding hard enough that I could feel it in my fingertips, but my breathing stayed slow. I focused on the rise and fall of my chest, the way my feet felt against the floor, grounding myself in the simple fact that I was here. I existed. I was not a scheduling error or an extra guest who'd shown up unannounced. I had been invited, even if the invitation had come with caveats. I thought of Alina's table, of the way her mother had pulled out a chair without thinking, of the way someone had nudged the serving dish closer to me with a casual, "Get more, there's plenty." The contrast burned, but it also steadied me. I knew now, beyond doubt, that what I was feeling wasn't overreaction, it was recognition. For years, my internal script in moments like this had been automatic. Minimize, apologize, redirect, make it easy on them, swallow the hurt before anyone noticed it existed. Tonight, though, that script felt foreign, like lines from a play I no longer believed in. Another one rose up to take its place, simpler, truer, edged with a kind of quiet courage I hadn't trusted in myself before. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam anything down or demand attention. I just let the decision settle fully into my spine. I was going to speak. Not to beg, not to convince, but to name what was happening in a room that depended on my silence to keep functioning. So when my mother whispered, "We didn't save you a plate," I finally whispered back something I'd been swallowing for years. "I can see that," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, not shaky, not small, just clear. I didn't lower it to match her whisper. I let it carry, soft but unmistakable, over the clink of cutlery. "You didn't save me a plate. You didn't save me a place at the table either." The change was immediate. Forks froze midair. Ben's phone slipped from his hand and landed on the table with a dull thud. Hannah finally looked up, eyes wide like she just realized the background character could speak. At the far end, Aunt Carol's hand stopped halfway to the water pitcher. Mom blinked, her polite smile cracking for a heartbeat. Then she laughed, a light, brittle sound. "Oh, don't be dramatic," she said, loud enough now for everyone. "We just miscounted. There's plenty of food in the kitchen." I didn't move. "No," I said. "You didn't miscount. You just didn't count me. There's a difference." A ripple went through the room. Someone shifted in their chair, the tablecloth pulling taut. Dad finally glanced up, his eyes flicking between us like he was watching a tennis match he hadn't agreed to attend. "You've been doing this my whole life," I continued, still in that same calm tone, "serving everyone else first and acting surprised when I notice there's nothing left." Mom's cheeks flushed. "That's not fair," she snapped. "You're making a scene over nothing. You can fix a plate in the kitchen." "This isn't about a plate." The words rose from somewhere deeper than this one evening, a vein tapped at last. "It's about never making room for me at all." Silence. Not the casual pause of people chewing, but a vacuum that sucked all the easy air out of the room. Even the kids stopped fidgeting, watching me with solemn eyes that seemed older than they should have been. I could feel every gaze now, the way they shifted, weighed, calculated. Hannah's mouth tightened, like she was biting back a retort. Ben stared at the tablecloth as if he might find an escape hatch in the pattern. Aunt Carol's lips parted, then pressed back together again. "You didn't forget me," I went on. "You just assumed I'd be fine eating whatever scraps were left, standing to the side, sitting in the kitchen, sleeping on the couch. You decided I was the one person here who didn't need a place made for them." Mom opened her mouth, closed it, then tried for a shaky chuckle. "Honestly, listen to yourself," she said. "All this over a chair? We've had a long day. Mistakes happen." Funny how the same mistake always happens to the same person, year after year. Dad cleared his throat. "Let's just calm down," he muttered. "We're having a nice dinner." "I'm calm," I said. And I was. My hands weren't shaking, my breaths were steady. It was everyone else who seemed rattled, glancing at each other like they'd been caught mid-rehearsal without their lines. Hannah finally spoke, her voice too bright. "Seriously, you can have my chair for a bit if it's that important. I was almost done anyway." I looked at her. "It's not about stealing your spot for 10 minutes so everyone can feel better. It's about the fact that no one thought I deserved one in the first place." The truth of that landed heavily. Even the candle flame seemed to stand straighter, as if the air had thickened around them. Mom's fingers tightened around her napkin, twisting it into a rope. "This is blown out of proportion," she said, the edge creeping back into her voice. "You're always so quick to assume the worst of us." I held her gaze. "No," I said quietly. "I'm finally assuming you meant what you did." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Dad dropped his fork, the clatter making everyone jump. "That's enough," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "You're overreacting. It was just a mistake." The word hung there thin and fragile, a paper shield trying to cover a crack in the foundation. And for the first time, I knew I wasn't going to let it be the end of the conversation. If it had just been tonight, maybe I could have believed it was a mistake. I let my eyes travel slowly around the table. But it's never just tonight, is it? No one answered, so I did. "Like the Christmas you told me there wasn't room and I slept on the couch while Hannah's friend, who you'd invited last minute, got the guest room ready and waiting. You handed her fresh towels and a basket of little soaps. You tossed me a blanket." Mom's mouth tightened. "That was different," she said. "She was a guest." "So was I," I replied. "I just had the wrong last name, I guess." Aunt Carol looked down at her lap. Ben's fork hovered over his plate, forgotten. "Or my graduation. Remember that dinner?" Mom seized to the lifeline. "We didn't have time." "You had time to make a reservation. You had time to order for everyone else, appetizers, entrees, dessert. You just forgot one tiny detail.
You forgot I'm vegetarian. You handed me the plate with steak anyway and told me to pick around it because sending it back would be embarrassing."
Dad shifted in his chair. "You ate the sides," he said weakly. "You were fine." "I picked at mashed potatoes while everyone else cut into their meals," I corrected, "on a night that was supposed to be about celebrating me. I went home hungry and heated up soup." Silence thickened, settling over the tablecloth like another layer of fabric. "And then there was last month," I said, "Dad's birthday." Mom's eyes flickered, a brief flash of alarm. Ben suddenly found his water glass fascinating. "You all went out," I said. "Nice restaurant, big table, balloons." "I know because I saw the photos." Hannah cleared her throat. "We thought you were busy," she murmured. I pulled my phone from my pocket and tapped the screen. "The group chat," I said. I scrolled up for a long time looking for my name. "There's the message where you talk about the date. Here's where you debate the time. Here's the picture of the menu. Not once does anyone say, 'Should we ask if she can make it?' Not even as an afterthought." I turned the phone so the screen faced them, the glow reflecting in their glasses. A "Happy Birthday, Dad" banner blurred in the background. I was nowhere. Mom bristled. "You stalk our messages now? You add me when you need something. You forget me when you're celebrating. I only know because Hannah posted this on our story." I swiped, showing the same picture with animated confetti floating around their faces. "3 hours before that, I texted you about my promotion. You left it on red." "I was busy," she said. "You replied to Hannah's meme 2 minutes later," I said quietly, with 3 laughing emojis. The table went very still. Even the kids seemed to understand something had shifted out of the realm of misunderstanding and into something harder to excuse. "This is ridiculous," Dad muttered. "We're talking about dinners and texts." "We're talking about patterns," I said, "about who gets counted, who gets plates, who gets rooms, who gets remembered when you're happy, not just when you need a favor." I slid the phone back into my pocket, but the evidence stayed in the air between us, humming. "Do you remember the 4th of July when there wasn't enough?" I asked. "You miscounted the hot dogs. There was one less than you needed. Guess who went without?" Mom opened her mouth, but I didn't give her time to rewrite it. "You told me to make a peanut butter sandwich," I said. "Told me not to be ungrateful because at least there was food. You laughed about it later. 'You're so independent,' you said, like that made it okay." Dad rubbed his temples. "We can't memorize every little thing that ever happened," he said. "You hold on to this stuff like grievances." "They're not little things when they always happen to the same person," I replied. "You forget me when there's not enough. You remember me when there's too much work." My voice stayed even, but each example landed with its own quiet thud. I could see it in the way shoulders tightened, in the way Hannah's fingers drummed against her glass before she realized and stilled them. "There was the time you turned my bedroom into a gym without warning," I added. "The time I drove 2 hours to surprise you and you'd all gone out to dinner without telling me. The time I offered to host and you said, 'It's easier at our place,' then asked me to come early to set up and stayed late to clean." Mom's eyes were shiny now, equal parts anger and something else. "So we're monsters. Is that what you're saying? That we've never done anything for you?" "I'm saying you've never made space for me the way you do for everyone else. Not at the table, not in your plans, not in your thoughts. And every time I tried to bring it up, you told me I was imagining it." Aunt Carol shifted, finally speaking up in a small voice. "I did wonder," she said, "about the couch and the birthday dinner. I noticed." Mom shot her a look sharp enough to cut, but the words were out there, another crack in the facade. I drew in a breath and let it out slowly. The room felt like it was holding its lungs too, waiting to see if I would retreat now that I laid out my case. That was the moment I realized this was bigger than listing wrongs. It was about what came next. "I'm not saying this to hurt you," I said. "I'm saying it because pretending it doesn't hurt me is the only thing that's kept this going."
No one argued. No one apologized. They just sat there in the silence they'd created, finally forced to look at it instead of stepping around it. And that's when I told them what I was done doing for this family. "I think you forget something else," I said. "You forget what I actually do for this family." Mom scoffed. "Oh, here we go." I kept my eyes on the center of the table, on the bowls and platters I'd straightened earlier without thinking. Who covered the power bill last winter when you accidentally missed 2 payments? You called me in a panic because they'd sent a shutoff notice. I sent you $400 that night. Mom's jaw clenched. "We paid you back." "No," I said gently. "You didn't. You said you would, then you forgot. Like you forgot to invite me to dinner, to count me at holidays, to keep a chair open." Ben shifted in his seat. "It's not that big a deal," he muttered. "You make good money." "And when you needed a new tire," I continued, "you called me from the side of the road. I left work, drove an hour, put it on my credit card. You promised to pay me back. You never did." His ears reddened. "I was broke," he said. "I've watched your kids for free so you could have date nights. I've edited Hannah's resumes, fixed Mom's laptop, driven Aunt Carol to her appointments. I come early to set the table, stay late to do the dishes. I send money when you ask, bring food when you don't, answer the phone when no one else will." A hush fell again, heavier this time. My words weren't accusations flung in anger, they were inventory. "You eat my effort every day," I said quietly, "but you can't save me a plate." At the far end, Hannah's husband, Mark, let out a low breath. He'd been almost invisible up to that point, but now he sat up a little straighter, looking around like he was seeing the room for the first time. "I didn't realize," he started, then trailed off when Hannah shot him a warning glance. "You taught me I should be grateful for any seat at your table, grateful to be squeezed on a couch, grateful to eat at the counter, grateful to be invited at all. But I'm the one who's been setting it." I let that sink in. My hands washing their dishes, my money covering their gaps, my time, my energy, always available, always expendable. "I drove home last year in a snowstorm because you said you couldn't manage Christmas without me," I said. "I slept on that pull-out again, got up early to peel potatoes and baste the turkey while you all slept in. And when guests arrived, you introduced me as the one who helps, not as your daughter, as help." Aunt Carol flinched, as if the word had hit her, too. Mom bristled. "You're twisting things," she said. "We've all helped each other." "Really?" I asked. "When was the last time any of you rearranged your plans for me, drove to me, asked what I needed? When was the last time you showed up for my life the way I show up for yours?" No one answered. The silence itself was an answer. "I'm not saying this to keep score," I added. "I'm saying it because you act like I'm some distant satellite who barely orbits this family, when in reality, you lean on me constantly. I've just made it easy to forget because I never ask you to acknowledge it." Mark cleared his throat again. "She's got a point," he murmured, almost to himself. "You know she's the one we always call when something goes wrong." Hannah shot him a sharper look this time. "Whose side are you on?" she hissed. He hesitated. "The side where people get a chair," he said, too quietly for anyone but me to really catch. That almost made me smile, almost. "The thing is," I said, "I can't stop you from treating me like an afterthought. That's a choice you make. But I can stop acting like I owe you everything in return." Their discomfort prickled across the table like static. For once, I didn't rush to smooth it away. I let it sit there with them the way I'd sat at too many counters and couches. Because if I'm just help to you, then it's time I decide who actually deserves my help. Mom was the first to break. She dropped her napkin onto her plate like a white flag. "All right," she said, voice too bright. We've all said things we don't mean. Let's just calm down and eat. We can fix this later." There it was, the old script. Smooth it over, bury it under gravy and small talk, hope the memory dissolves by dessert. Dad nodded quickly, seizing the lifeline. "Your mother's right," he added. "This is getting out of hand. It's just dinner. Don't make a scene." I looked at him, really looked, and saw every time he'd said those words without saying them, every time he'd let Mom's choices stand because calling them out would have disturbed his peace. "It's never just dinner to the person who doesn't get a seat," I said. "And this is the scene you made. I'm just not stepping out of it this time." Mom sighed, exasperation leaking through her poise. "You're taking everything so personally. We can be more careful next time, okay?" I shook my head. "No, I've heard 'next time' my whole life. Next time you'll save me a plate. Next time you'll remember to invite me. Next time you'll celebrate my news. But next times never come for me. They only come for everyone else." Hannah frowned. "So what do you want? An apology? For every little thing that's ever happened? I want you to stop acting like this is about one night, and I want you to hear me when I say I'm done playing my part in it." The room held its breath. "I'm not dropping everything anymore," I said, my voice steady. "I'm not rearranging my life to show up at events where I'm treated like an afterthought. I'm not answering calls only when you need money or a babysitter. I'm not going to keep pouring into people who can't even be bothered to count me when you're setting the table." Mom's eyes flashed. "So you're just going to abandon your family?" "I didn't come here to beg for scraps. I came to see if you ever plan to treat me like family. Now I have my answer." A muscle jumped in Dad's jaw. "You're overreacting," he insisted. "You're going to regret saying these things." "I've regretted not saying them for years," I said softly, "and I'm not going to regret finally telling the truth." I felt the moment my decision solidified, like a switch flipping. The ache was still there, but it wasn't in control anymore. I pushed my chair back, not from the table, because I'd never been given one, but from the place I'd been standing, and the scrape of wood on wood cut through the quiet. "I'm not coming to dinners where I'm treated like this," I said. "If you want a relationship with me, it won't be on the terms where I'm always standing, serving, and swallowing my feelings so you can stay comfortable." Ben blurted, "Come on, don't be like that. It's just one night." But even he didn't sound convinced. Aunt Carol reached out, fingertips brushing the edge of the table. "Maybe we should listen to her," she murmured, but Mom ignored her. "You're selfish," Mom snapped. "Think about your father, about the kids. You're hurting everyone." "They're watching how you treat me." I glanced at my niece and nephew, their wide eyes tracking every word. "They're learning who gets counted and who doesn't. That hurts more than my honesty ever will." I picked up my coat from the back of a chair where someone else's jacket was draped, layering evidence on evidence. My fingers moved calmly, almost gently as I slid my arms into the sleeves. "Wait," Hannah said, half standing. "You're really leaving over this?" "I'm leaving because of everything that came before this. Tonight just made it impossible to pretend I didn't see it anymore." Panic flickered across a few faces, quick, then buried under indignation and denial. They weren't used to me walking away. They were used to me bending. Mom's voice trembled between anger and fear. "If you walk out like this, don't expect us to come running after you." I met her gaze one last time. "I've stopped expecting that," I said. "That's kind of the point." The room hummed with shock, with all the words they weren't saying. Behind it, something else stirred, a thin thread of regret maybe, or the first faint echo of realization. I didn't wait to find out which. I turned toward the doorway, feeling every step like it was drawing a line behind me, clear and final. The front door clicked shut behind me with a soft finality that felt louder than anything said at the table. Outside, the air was sharp and cool, the kind that wakes up parts of you that had gone numb. I stood on the porch for a second, coat half buttoned, listening to the muffled hum of conversation leaking through the walls. It sounded distant, like a TV left on in another apartment.
"I'm not cutting you off," I wrote. "I'm stepping back from situations where I'm disrespected. If you want a relationship, it has to look different." "How?" she shot back. "We can't change the past." I stared at the typing bubbles. Then, "Start by acknowledging it. Stop telling me I imagined it." The bubbles appeared, disappeared. No message came. A few days later, Dad called. I let it ring out, then listened to the voicemail. "Hey, kiddo," he said, voice softer than I remembered. I heard what you told your mother. I know you think I didn't see it. Maybe I didn't want to. That's on me. I'd like to talk, really talk. No, it's just dinner. Call me when you're ready." It wasn't everything, but it wasn't nothing. 2 weeks after I'd left their house, an invitation popped up in the group chat, this time addressed to me by name. "Family brunch at ours next Sunday," Mom wrote. "We'd like you to come." No other details, no mention of the last time we'd all been in a room together. I didn't answer for an hour. Then, deliberately, I typed, "Will there be a place for me at the table this time, in more ways than one?" The chat went silent. Then Aunt Carol reacted with a heart. A moment later, Dad replied, "Yes." I waited. Finally, Mom wrote, "We'll make sure." It wasn't an apology, it was a sentence that could mean nothing or everything, but at least it was an acknowledgement that the question had to be asked. I sat with it, feeling both the discomfort and the clarity that my boundary had created. They were unsettled because the old script didn't work on me anymore. I was unsettled because there was no guarantee they'd truly change. But for the first time, the terms of any future contact were not unspoken assumptions weighted in their favor. They were shaped, allowed by me. Boundaries didn't make everything tidy. They made the lines visible. And once you see where you stand, it's harder to be pushed back into the shadows without noticing. Time didn't fix everything, but it did stretch the space between their voices and my choices. Weeks turned into months, and I found myself saying yes more often to invitations that didn't come with strings attached. Lena and I started a Sunday night ritual, rotating between our apartments, cooking whatever we could cobble together, and inviting a handful of people who felt like solid ground. We played board games, burned garlic bread, argued about movies. No one kept score of who hosted last or who brought what. We just made sure there was enough for everyone. One night, standing in my own kitchen, I looked at the table I'd bought secondhand and sanded myself. 4 mismatched chairs, a 5th I'd dragged in from the desk. I'd set out plates, glasses, a crooked vase of grocery store flowers. As I laid down the last fork, I caught myself counting, not to see who might go without, but to make sure no one did. When my friends arrived, they shrugged off coats, dropped bags, drifted toward the table like it was the natural center of the room instead of a stage. "Sit wherever," I said. "There's a plate for everyone." The words slipped out casually, but they hung in the air for me, echoing, "There's a plate for everyone." I moved around the table, topping off water, nudging bowls within reach, not because I had to prove my place, but because I wanted the people I loved to feel what I hadn't. Halfway through the meal, laughter spilling over each other, I realized I hadn't checked my phone once. It sat face down on the counter, my mother's number just another contact, not a command center. The old anxiety, that low hum waiting for her approval or disapproval, had quieted to something I could almost forget. Every so often, Dad texted. Sometimes we talked, cautiously, about work, about the weather, about how he'd been thinking about what you said. Once he apologized, not with fanfare, but in a quiet, halting way that sounded more like him than any speech would have. He said, "I should have asked more questions. I should have noticed. I needed you to, I replied, but I'm glad you are now. Mom stayed more distant. There were occasional group messages, pictures of centerpieces, updates about Hannah's events, Ben's kids. She was polite when she did reach out, almost formal. I let the space be what it was. I answered when I had the energy, declined invitations that came without any sign things would be different. I stopped chasing the table that never had a seat for me. Instead, I built my own, literally and otherwise. I hosted Thanksgiving in my small apartment, the table extended with a borrowed fold-out, chairs dragged from every corner. Before we ate, I circled the room, checking. 1 plate, 2, 5, 8. Enough. More than enough. I caught my reflection in the window, moving between guests with a dish in my hands, and something eased inside me. I had become, in so many small ways, what I'd needed growing up, the person who notices, who counts, who makes room. Later that night, when everyone had gone and the table was a mess of crumbs and empty glasses, I sat in one of the chairs and looked at the chaos with an odd sort of pride. This was my mess, my table, my people who never made me wonder if I was an extra. My family of origin still existed, a constellation I was no longer orbiting out of obligation. Maybe they would shift, maybe they wouldn't. I could choose how close I stood, how often I stepped into their gravity. But the desperate, hungry part of me that once would have done anything for a corner of their table had finally learned something simple and radical. I didn't have to beg for a place where I was treated like a placeholder. I could choose the tables where my presence was assumed, not negotiated. Looking back, I know now that this was never just about a plate. It was never just about one dinner, one empty chair, one careless sentence whispered at the edge of a crowded table. That moment was only the clearest picture of what had been happening in blurrier ways my entire life. Being counted last, or not at all, being told there was no room, and expected to be grateful for whatever scraps of space or attention were left over once everyone else had taken what they wanted. Being denied a literal plate was only the surface. Underneath was years of emotional starvation. Years of hearing in 100 subtle ways that my needs were negotiable, my presence optional, my hurt an inconvenience. Every forgotten invitation, every couch while someone else got the guest room, every "you're overreacting" when I dared to say it stung, those were not accidents, they were choices. That's the hardest part to accept, I think. We want to believe the people we love just don't know better, that if we explain ourselves clearly enough, they'll suddenly see us. But families who repeatedly forget you are not suffering from bad memory. They are making a decision about who matters most, who is central and who is support staff. They're telling you in actions louder than any apology exactly where they think you belong. I used to twist myself into knots to avoid that conclusion. I made excuses, imagined misunderstandings, told myself I was too sensitive. I let them call it just dinner so I wouldn't have to admit that it was about so much more, that it was about worth. Here's what I've learned the hard way. You are allowed to walk away from tables where you are always served last or not at all. You are allowed to say, "This isn't enough for me," even if they call you selfish. You are allowed to stop explaining your hunger to people who keep insisting you should be full. I used to think any seat at their table was better than none. Now I know I can build my own. Family isn't who eats first, it's who makes sure you're fed too. It's the people who notice when you're missing, who save you a plate without thinking, who make space for your story in the middle of their own. Sometimes those people share your blood, sometimes they don't. What matters is not the name on their Christmas cards, but the way they hold you when it counts. If any of this feels uncomfortably familiar, if you've ever stood in a doorway and realized there was no place set for you, at a table, in a conversation, in your own family's priorities, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not crazy, you are not too sensitive, you are not asking for too much when you ask to be counted.
You deserve to sit where you are seen, heard, and fed in all the ways that matter. And if the people who should have done that won't, you're allowed to find or create the ones who will. If you've been left out, overlooked, or humiliated by your own family, I'd like to hear from you. Tell me where you're watching from, and if you're comfortable, share a moment that made you realize you were being treated like an afterthought. You never know who might read your words and feel a little less alone. And if stories like this hit close to home, if they hurt a little but also make something inside you feel seen, stay with me. There are more stories coming, some that may feel uncomfortably familiar, and I hope deeply validating. Hit subscribe if you haven't already, so you don't miss the next one.